I was absolutely horrified by what I saw on one of DJ Audit's videos today, but hopefully there's a solution to it. So both of those I'll tell you in a minute. If you're not familiar with DJ Audits, I'll link the channel in the description below. And if you're not familiar with what they do, audit channels go about filming different places, different people, different buildings for your entertainment, your enjoyment, documentation, or whatever the purpose might be. There's a few questions raised by some people in the comments. Is this legal? I'll come onto those in a minute under various headings and categories. If I miss anything out, just let me know in the comments because I never script my videos. I don't have time, but I will come back to those if you need me to. First of all, if you're new to me, if you don't know who I am, I'm Daniel Smith, a barrister of England and Wales, and I like to help you to understand law on this channel. So please do hit that like button and subscribe. That's how YouTube helps me to grow my audience. So let's get on to this. Now, first of all, what was it that I saw that horrified me? Well, in one of the videos from DJ Audits, which I'll link in the description below, was of a plastic recycling plant. And if you're not familiar with the process, I mean, I'm not overly familiar with the process, but essentially what they do is they break plastic down into pellets and then they resell those to other manufacturers, I think, and then they melt them down to make other plastic things with it. But on this one particular site visit, DJ Audits filmed lots of these plastic pellets outside of the premises of this recycling plant. They were seen to be on the hedges and even going into the drains, which obviously make their way into the sewage system and the water system. And wildlife have been known to eat these things, and so they make their way into the food chain, and they generally pollute the whole area, the whole system. And with any of these things, it's a cumulative effect. So if they don't clean it up, then it's going to get worse and worse, continue to get worse, and have a much more devastating effect on the environment. Now, I exchanged comments with DJ Audits on the channel here, and the response was this. He said he'd found it a few times and makes more of a big deal about it when the objections to the work are voiced louder. That's something I'll come on to in a minute, because some people don't like these channels, but I'll give you some views, both sides on that, so you can make an informed decision. But also he says on this occasion, he trusts that a swift cleanup operation followed by daily cleaning tasks implemented will bring this area back under control by the boss, who seemed to be reasonable. The pellets, often mistaken by food by wildlife and then entering the waterways, can be eaten by fish and enter the food chain, etc. All of which is quite devastating, I'm sure, and I hope you all agree. It's good to hear that the boss in this situation was reasonable and amenable to cleaning up the area. And that indeed is one thing that all of these companies should be looking to do. One thing that it's been highlighted by these kind of videos, which I'm putting under the heading and category of citizen journalism. Now, anyone can be a journalist. So now we're coming into the headings here of what is this type of filming? Is it legal, etc. Now, there's various headings. Now, first of all, is it legal to go out with a camera? Secondly, is it legal to film these private buildings? Is it legal to fly a drone over them? And is it legal to film other people without their consent, permission, etc.? Let's deal with those in turn. In the UK, we essentially have a freedom-based society. You're free to do anything unless there is a law that curtails it. But also we have a rights and a duties system whereby you have certain rights and you have certain duties. For example, you drive a car, you automatically have a statutory duty to other road users and a common law duty to other road users. And most things that you have a right to have an accompanying duty. And so in operating in everyday society, you have to uphold those duties, but otherwise you are free to do what you wish. Now, when it comes to filming, you are generally free to go out and film anything that you wish to film, unless there's a law that curtails it. Now, when we come to privacy, there is no automatic expectation of privacy in a public place. The Court of Appeal has held in very narrow cases that you can have a right to privacy in certain scenarios. Now, for example, you've got very young children, or and you're trying to keep yourself secluded, or you've got somebody going to a clinic of some sort and they want to keep their activities private. There are some scenarios that the court would say, well, it was reasonable that they could expect that to be kept private. But apart from that, very generally speaking, there's no automatic right to privacy. Not to be confused with the ECHR rights and the right to private and family life at home, etc. Those are applied in a very slightly different way. Going out in public and filming, you're generally free to do so. There is a GDPR element, which I'll come back to a little bit later. It comes under the journalism exemption, which I've dealt with in previous videos. But generally speaking, you're free to go out and film and call yourself a citizen journalist. You don't need to register with anybody. You don't need to do anything. There's, again, potentially the option of registering with the ICO for data protection. But again, I'll come back to that a bit later. Secondly, is it legal to go out and film these buildings? Well, generally, yes. Think Google Maps and any other maps for that matter. They go out in their vehicles, they film all the streets, all the buildings, everything else. They do generally obscure the addresses of these places and some numbers. And on request, you can have your house blurred out, and Google will generally uphold that request, particularly if it's a private residence. They will generally uphold that request and blur it out. They don't necessarily have to do that. There's an argument either way, but Google generally doesn't argue about that. They just do that. But going out and filming these commercialized buildings is generally perfectly fine. Now, particularly as this is usually a handheld camera, most people captured on the premises will be incidental for the most part. If they were, let's say they were in an office and being filmed through a window for an extended period of time, that might be beyond what is considered reasonable. And again, I'll come back to that under the journalism exemption in a moment with GDPR considerations and so on. But very generally speaking, filming these commercial buildings is usually fine. So let's take a sidestep for a moment. A lot of these videos end up in interactions, some of them perfectly polite and reasonable, and some of them end up in a heated reaction, which, let's be honest, is why a lot of people watch these things. But on the one hand, a lot of people don't like these audit channels because they are said to go out and provoke these reactions and then film it for views and likes and shares, etc., etc. But I've got two responses to that. First of all, a lot of these channels go out perfectly politely, and the reaction is from the other people, as in the hostile negative reaction is from the other people. There are some channels that deliberately provoke this reaction, but let's be clear, even if they were provoking a reaction, so long as that is not becoming hostile and it's oppressive and unacceptable, then it's not going to go beyond the realms of what is reasonable. Because even in a claim, let's say, for harassment, if the behavior is reasonable, then it's not harassment. Because if the behavior is deemed to be a reasonable behavior, and the bar to what is unreasonable might be much higher than a lot of people think it is. Because we do also have the right to alarm and shock in our freedom of expression, in what we say and what we do, ideas that we convey, information we convey, and how we convey that information. It may shock and disturb other people. It may upset other people. That is not harassment. It doesn't make it harassment. Only that which is beyond that threshold, which is oppressive and unacceptable, would be considered along the lines of harassment. And harassment anyway would need to be a course of conduct at least 2 occasions. Although there's some arguments on an ongoing incident whether that could amount to harassment because of the duration, but that's again subject for another video. But generally speaking, a lot of people don't like these kind of videos because of that interaction. But the second thing that I would say, along with what I've just said, is think of most reality TV shows. The whole purpose of those is to attract views and attention, likes, shares, etc. And the way that they are structured, if you think programs like Big Brother, not that I watched it, but it's based on the concept and the premise of human interest, curiosity, interaction, fly on the wall, observation type thing. People want to see what's going on. They want to see the interactions. They want to see the discussions and the fights and the fallouts. And they want to see this from a third-party fly-on-the-wall perspective. What's the other one? Spider under the table, isn't it? If you've got any more, drop them in the comments below. There's probably loads of them. But people do want to see these interactions. That's why people watch. That's why they get so good ratings. Now, all of the reality TV shows are based on this same premise. That's why these channels work. That's why they succeed. But actually, there's a third reason that I would challenge people that don't like these channels, is that this example that I've just described to you here, the reason I'm doing this video, I told DJ Audits that I was going to do this video because I was so alarmed. Actually, someone else told me about this. I went to watch it and then I was alarmed by it, left a comment and decided to do the video, is that these plastic pellets were seeping out of the doors of this commercial premises onto the streets, into the hedges, down the drains, which will ultimately get eaten by wildlife, fish, etc., which is terrible. Unquestionably terrible that these should make their way out into the environment, the wildlife, the food chain, etc. So this one video, but for this one video, that interaction with the owner of this premises or the boss of this premises has, it would seem, a regular cleanup and an ongoing review to ensure that these plastic pellets do not make their way out of this building. Another heading that I was going to come to, so we've done being out in public generally, filming these buildings generally. Thirdly, flying a drone. Now this sort of overlaps with another one of the responses that a lot of these people have, which first of all is you cannot film me or you need permission to film me. And the second is you need permission to fly the drone over the premises, or I won't allow you to fly the drone over the premises. I'm not going to allow that, is one of the common responses. Well, they're not in the position. They don't have the jurisdiction to refuse you permission to fly over this building, save for certain places. There are certain restricted areas, airports, obviously, certain military sites and whatever. There are apps, and you should always check. If you're flying a drone, you should always go and check. Now, as a brief overview on the law of drones, I've done drone law before. It's changed a lot over the last few years and I haven't covered the updates. I am planning to invite Geeksvana, who I'll also link in the description below, who does stay on top of the law for these things, so we can have a chat about the updated laws. But still, very broadly speaking, the very, very tiny drones, you can still fly around even over commercial and residential premises. The larger ones, you need to stay much further away, etc. So we'll cover that in another video. But broadly speaking, you're allowed to fly them over commercial premises without their permission. You don't need their permission. And the simple reason for this is that they do not own the airspace. It's neither nuisance nor is it trespass. There have been cases that have decided that it's neither nuisance nor trespass to fly over these buildings, so long as it's sufficiently high above it. Obviously, if it is only 2 meters above and it's causing disturbance, then it is what we call immediately above that building and there will be an objection, a reasonable objection. If it's high enough above, but obviously not too high that it breaches the CAA regulations, then so long as it's within that middle zone, it is almost always going to be perfectly okay and they will not be able to object. There is a GDPR element in all of this, both in the face-to-face filming and in the drone filming. Now, as I've explained in previous videos, any information that can identify an identifiable individual is personal data for the purposes of the Data Protection Act and GDPR. Now, this does apply to individuals, even though a lot of people think it doesn't apply to individuals. This does apply to individuals, whether it's just you or just you as a sole trader or whatever. If you are processing personal data outside of a wholly household activity. So quite arguably, if you are filming someone, putting it on YouTube, and that is your business, and most serious YouTubers will have a business that operates the channel, or at the very least, any of the proceeds from the channel will go to a business because that will just make business, financial and tax sense. Most of them will do that. And even if it's not, even if you're just an individual posting it on YouTube, it is outside of your own household activity. Even sharing a private photograph online, somebody could object to within the family, because there was a European court case that decided that there was a photograph shared on Facebook without permission, and therefore it was outside of the household exemption, therefore data protection rules applied. If they apply, then all of the data protection principles apply, which ordinarily you need consent or a legitimate interest to process the data. In this case, the data being the person, their voice, etc. But this is where the journalism exemption comes in, because there is no requirement to register with any kind of journalism authority or regulator or anything like that. There are certain bodies that regulate certain types of news, and there are codes, etc., broadcasting and all that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, if you want to pick up a camera, go out and become a citizen journalist, you can. And if you do film someone and you are processing personal data, and if you were in the scenario where, which most likely you would be, if somebody is personally identifiable in the video, you would be processing it in accordance with the data protection regulation. Then you would need to look at the journalism exemption, which I dealt with in another video, which I'll link below. And very broadly speaking, that would mean that you have to decide that the journalism exemption applies. That would mean that you're going out to film something with a journalistic purpose in mind. It's either entertaining, it's creative, it's artistic, or it's newsworthy, there's a public interest there, or any one of a number of reasons that it could be journalistic in nature. And then that the compliance with data protection, i.e. getting someone's consent or blurring them out, etc., would be incompatible with your journalistic purposes. Now, if you think about ordinary journalists going out to interview somebody, now obviously if they are filming someone, it is personal information because they're identifiable. Obviously it's a journalistic purpose, and obviously it would be incompatible to blur out the person with whom they are having a conversation. And arguably, if a request was made to obscure the person and you could still convey the journalistic purpose of the video without showing the person's face, then there might be an argument to show that person's face. But that would be in competition with the public interest element in that conversation. Now, oftentimes in these types of videos, the interaction is not necessarily instigated by the person with the camera. Very often it is instigated by the person that comes along to say, you cannot film here. That's sometimes a security guard, sometimes a police officer, sometimes just somebody that works at the commercial premises. They come out and say, you cannot film here, or you need permission to film here, and they instigate the conversation. And in those situations, it essentially becomes a journalistic interview. So for as long as they continue the conversation, it's a journalistic interview of sorts. It may not be one that they pre-planned, but it sort of becomes one because they are obviously not obligated to have that conversation, and they can leave at any time. They can go back in the building and not be filmed. So they had the choice to be filmed or not. But as I say, if the conversation becomes heated and later they decide that they wish they hadn't said those things and they would prefer it to be removed, then there might be a discussion as to whether or not that should be obscured from the video. But generally speaking, whether we're talking a van in the street with the logo on the side or a building with the logo on the side and things like that, then particularly the one with plastic recycling, the name of the company and the pellets outside, there is a genuine public interest in the way that that premises handles the waste material that is coming out of that area. So there's a public interest element that competes with any sort of private data element. And so all of these things need to be taken into consideration. And just finally, there is obviously a distinction between all of what I've just said and home domestic CCTV cameras, because the main difference being they are static, fixed cameras trained on a given area, and if you film outside of the curtilage of your own property, then again, the data protection rules apply. If you are processing someone else's personal data and it's not your own household because it's someone else's household, then of course you need to comply with those principles. And I'll remind you of a case that I went through in great detail where the defendant in that case was found liable for both harassment and breach of data protection because of the extreme nature of the actions within that case. That was Fairhurst and Woodard with Ring doorbell cameras. That wasn't just one camera, it was multiple cameras fixed in different locations, and the defendant was said to have had conversations with the claimant in that case, in addition to processing personal information, being the filming of her coming and going from the house, and the judge found that that was both harassment and breach of data protection. So I'll link that video as well, if I remember to do so, in the description below. So I just wanted to do this video because whether you like these auditor channels or not, there is a fair argument that they have a place in the journalism sphere, just in the same way or very similar way that any other journalist in any other news company would have working for their organization. And just as one final comparison that I've just thought of that I would throw in here is the undercover journalists that have concealed cameras. You've seen some of the shows where they go to work, they actually go to work for some companies and they have a concealed camera of sorts, you know, peeping through the buttonhole on a shirt or something like that. In those cases, you'll notice that they almost always, well, all the times that I remember, blur out the faces and even mask the voices sometimes of those that they're having conversations with, because it was concealed and because no one knew that they were filming. But all the same, the public interest element applied, because if they were doing something wrong within that organization, then it was only right that they were filmed doing so and they were documenting the whole process of what was going on. So even then, whilst they did take the steps to blur out faces, they are still filming and they are obviously still using that footage and measuring very carefully whether the journalism exemption overrides all of the interests of the parties involved and whether it was compatible to apply all of the principles of data protection. So that is a very broad overview, not to be taken as legal advice, but hopefully it's interesting, hopefully it's useful. Please do hit the like button and subscribe. That helps my channel grow. I really appreciate it. And check out the links and the videos linked in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.